Evening, everybody. Delight to be back a second week in a row, and even more of a delight to be hosting this incredible conversation. And very, very timely. After last week, we kind of set you up in these wonderful ways, Bichette, that these things happen, that Judith and I have begun a discussion, a conversation about the role of Musar in liberal Judaism. And so tonight we're going to hear more about that conversation, and hosting us in that conversation is Rabbi Monique Mayer, a rabbi in Bristol, but also, and particularly relevant for this, a practitioner of Musar. Long before everybody else was really talking about it in liberal Judaism, we were seeing these sort of sessions pop up on biennials, and slowly they were growing into more and more people attending. And during lockdown, that also increased. Rabbi Monique will be in conversation with Rabbi Aaron Goldstein, who I know many of you know very, very well from the Ark Synagogue. And with Rabbi Aaron, that always when there's something new and he sees that it's taking an innovative place in our community, then usually Aaron is sat right alongside it and facilitating ways of making that happen and reach our communities. So I am really excited to see you two in conversation over this very old tradition combined with what we like to think of as a very relevant, radical place of liberal Judaism. So over to both of you, and all of us will listen, and I'm sure you'll come to us to answer our questions as the night continues.
We will certainly do that. Thanks so much indeed, Rabbi Charlie, and for everybody for being here this evening. It is very opportune. When Charlie said that this is very good because it follows on very nicely from the conversation last week, I think there was a question mark about the role of Musar within liberal Judaism. So it's brilliant that we'll be able to respond to that straight away this week. I'm also, when Charlie says very generous in saying that I'm the forefront of things, it's purely hereditary. In 1977, my father, Rabbi Dr. Andrew Goldstein, had a sabbatical in the States and brought back with him, not literally, but Debbie Friedman and her music. And that informed a whole generation of those that attended Kadima Summer School as it was then, now Machane Kadima Summer Camp, run by LJY Netzer, still enthusing our young people. And it was a real delight when Rabbi Monique began to introduce to us colleagues a little bit about this word Musar. And I have to say that being not the brightest of cookies always, what was this Musar? I sort of remembered a little bit about it from my rabbinic training, but I didn't know too much. So you may be in the same space tonight. And so we thought that we'd start tonight with the question, what is Musar?
What is Musar? Thank you. And it has nothing to do with a four-legged creature. That's the first thing I want to say. It's not moose, it's Musar. Or some people say Musar. But what I'm going to do is share my screen. And rather than me explaining everything in detail, I thought I'd start off with a quote. Aaron, you want to read that?
At first, I tried to change the world and failed. Then I tried to change my city and failed. Then I tried to change my family and failed. Finally, I tried to change myself, and then I was able to change the world.
Thank you. And this was very much where I was coming from when I discovered Musar, which is that I was overwhelmed by everything going on in the world. And as I withdrew into concentric circles until I finally got back to myself, I thought, well, I can't seem to change anything else. So what Salanter said is true, is that I need to maybe start with myself. And so in order to answer the question of what is Musar and how does that play into this, I would like to play you a video from Let It Ripple. Some of you might have heard of Hilary Schlein, she created the Webby Awards. Sorry, Tiffany Schlein. And she has created with Let It Ripple, this is from a few years ago, this video.
I love the word mensch. Just like a lot of Yiddish, there isn't an exact translation that suffices, but it means doing the right thing, being a good person, thinking of yourself in the context of the bigger picture. And I think as the world is becoming more and more 24/7, more distractions, more forces coming at us trying to influence us, and as the world problems are getting more complicated, we need more mensches. And then, about a year ago, I learned that there's this huge resurgence happening right now, all around these ancient insights and ideas and traditions that are so relevant today because they're all about how to be more of a mensch.
A mensch is a lady or gent who would help any friend at the soonest request. And they gladly accept lipstick stains on her cheeks from the kisses that Bubby gives best.
A mensch.
A mensch.
My definition of being a mensch.
See, a mensch holds the door and takes part in the horror while giving out mazzles with ease.
A person who does good deeds when other people aren't looking.
And a mensch wipes the floor if you spill all your borscht and gesundheit at everyone's sneeze.
People that have good standards, ethical standards.
Now, in some ways, my team and I have been studying what I will call here menschiology for a while. We just didn't realize it. We had made this film called The Science of Character about this fascinating research that identified universal virtues that people across cultures and history agree lead to a good life. And that there are 24 character strengths that, when practiced, could lead to those virtues. And after the film premiered, all these Jewish educators and rabbis were like, "This is great, but why didn't you mention Musar?" And I was like, "Mus what?" I felt like such a bad Jew. But apparently, Musar is like this ancient Jewish science of character. So if the science proves we can develop who we are, Musar offers the tools to help you do that. And these tools can apply to anyone, religious to atheist, Jewish or not. I mean, I'm not religious, but I love the traditions, the questioning, the humor, the holidays that are like, they failed to kill us. Let's eat. So perhaps that explains why I didn't know about Musar. But then I discovered some of my favorite thinkers around character were Jews, and they didn't mention Musar either. Now, they weren't professional Jews, but still, I was hooked. I had to find out more about Musar. It turns out it has this amazing history. The ideas go as far back as the Bible, but really started to take shape in the 10th and 11th centuries, when Jewish philosophers started cherry-picking the best ideas from all of Jewish wisdom about living with meaning and purpose. Rav Sayadia, for example, it's pronounced Rav Sadia, got it, thanks, published a chapter called How a Person Ought to Behave in the World. By the way, figuring out which cherries to put on the tree with my spectacular cadre of rabbis was very Talmudic. And Rabbi Baha ibn Pequada,
that's Bachya ibn Pekuda,
wrote Duties of the Heart, the first systematic overview of Jewish ethics. 900 years later, as the Jews of Europe were being tormented by pogroms, and many were considering converting or assimilating, a Lithuanian rabbi, Yisrael Salanter, looked through the growing collection around living an ethical, meaningful life and published rituals and practices that would help people fulfill that path. He also republished some of the classics and turned Musar into a movement. The Musar movement thrived for many decades. People lived it. Working on themselves was part of the language and culture. Until the Holocaust. The Musar movement slowed and almost disappeared. Until now, as we plow through the 21st century, Musar is coming back. Right at the same time that similar conversations around character are emerging from all sectors of society. So in Musar's framework, instead of character strengths, Musar calls these qualities midot. And we're each made up of dozens, if not hundreds of midot. But with the help of a few rabbis, we fit them nicely into our periodic table. And now I'm sounding like a rabbi, but I'm definitely not. These midot aren't necessarily good or bad. They're all important parts of who we are. Even qualities like envy. Some envy can motivate you to work harder. Or impatience. Sometimes in the face of injustice, you need more impatience. It's not about ridding yourself of any of these qualities. because that would be virtually impossible. Musar is about creating rituals and practices that help you better control or develop different qualities. For example, say you want to increase your sense of gratitude, which there's so much research today saying that if you feel more grateful, you're going to be healthier, you're going to have more mental strength, and you're going to sleep better. So this practice on gratitude is based on the Jewish tradition of 100 blessings a day. My good friend Amichai first taught me about it.
Every day, one gets to say 100 blessings.
Everything from waking up first thing in the morning, to the big moments, to all the little moments.
But also when you go to the bathroom. That's the Jewish way. 100 blessings every day. Do I say them? I try.
And I love this part. At the end of the day, as you're going to sleep, instead of looking at your screen, close your eyes and think about all those moments, all those things you're grateful for. Or another classic Musar practice is from Maimonides. Instead of giving, let's say, $100 to one organization or person, every day you would give $1 to a different person who needs it for 100 days. So it's working on the muscle of generosity, so over time you will be more generous to others. Regardless of how you do it, this type of repetition is key to Musar. Or as the yogis will tell you, it's all about the practice. Even neuroscience now proves that focus and repetition strengthen pathways in the brain to make the action easier over time. So one way people do this is to choose a particular quality and focus on it for a season at a time, or a month, or a week. Like Benjamin Franklin, he created a chart of 13 virtues and focused on each one for a week at a time. He'd mark every time he faulted and tracked his progress over 50 years. And no, he's not Jewish, if you're wondering. He was not Franklin's time. Franklininsky.
Benjamin Franklin.
But I did hear that his ideas had some influence on Musar practices, so an honorary Jew. While for Franklin this was an individual practice, Musar also suggests that doing a practice with someone else or a group really helps. And apparently I've been doing a practice with a group and I didn't even know it. Several years ago I was starting to feel like life was happening too fast. Like there wasn't a moment to be present. So my family and I reimagined the weekly Shabbat ritual in a way that would speak to those needs. We decided to turn off all screens for 24 hours every week. And doing this for the past 5 years has had such an incredible impact on us. I think that's why I've been so excited to learn about all these other practices I can try. They're all about reminding us to think of ourselves in the context of the bigger picture. Alan Marinis, the founder of the Musar Institute, writes a lot about humility. He's known, along with Rabbi Ira Stone, to be responsible for the modern Musar movement. So Marinis writes, humility is limiting oneself to an appropriate amount of space while leaving room for others, which is something I think about a lot and wrestle with. I feel like as a woman, women were left off of so many history books for their contributions, so on the one hand, I feel like it's my duty to represent, but I also don't want to take up too much space. So whenever I do something public, I have things I do to try to keep it in check. Okay, that's not actually what I do for my practice, but you could. But there is one humility practice you could start the next time you're in a group setting. If you're more of a vocal person like me, try to let everyone else speak before you. And if you're more of a quiet person, try to be the first one to speak. There's a powerful Jewish story about the relationship between humility and courage. Each person carries 2 notes, one in each pocket. One note says, "The whole entire world was made for me." And the other note says, "I am only dust and ashes." So basically knowing when to summon up courage and when to be humble. And here's perhaps my favorite part of Musar. You create your own path. I like to think of it as code, your own personal mensch code, looking at your patterns and creating your own system of practices that works for you. It's like we're each the captain of our own small sailboats, wrestling with all these different elements within us and around us. And we have to keep reading the wind and deciding when to pull in the sails and when to let them out and when to change directions. And there are always going to be things we have no control over, unforeseen obstacles, or even how long the ride is going to be. But we can adjust the sails. So as the world needs more mensches, and we're all responsible for our own path, we need to ask ourselves, what qualities do I want to work on? What kind of person do I want to be?
Someone who dedicates their time to do good.
Una persona que quiere ver a todo el mundo feliz.
Someone who's honest.
And is loyal to their friends.
Someone who shows gratitude and shows good honor.
They respect their parents. They have good posture, I guess. Loving to others.
A generous person to everyone they meet.
He is really nice.
Someone who puts others before themselves.
And is very often righteous.
So what do we need to do to get there?
As my mother used to say, a mensch is a mensch.
Oh, hey, you could be a mensch too. I said, hey, you could be a mensch too. Hey, you could be a mensch too. I said, hey, you could be a mensch too. All I wish is for menschiness. I said, all I want in life is your menschiness. Oh, all I wish.
I love the word
Whoops.
mensch. Just
Sorry.
like a lot of Yiddish theory.
That's what a fantastic way to start an incredible explanation about what Musar is. Thanks so much for introducing that to me. I had great fun watching it earlier as well, and just laughing out loud at everything that I saw. It may have wound other people up as well, which is also interesting. It's obviously slightly culturally different to the UK, but something that I really appreciated. But I guess one big question that I have is so that's what Musar is, but how did it get to the UK? Why did we get into it?
So, yeah, it's been sort of brewing for a while. Alan Marinas, who's one of the teachers that Tiffany Schlein mentioned, he started to really get into Musar in the 90s and then wrote a book. He actually wrote one book called Climbing Jacob's Ladder, which is about his own journey into Musar. But he also wrote a book to sort of break it down for the average person. So it went beyond his own personal journey and how we could all practice Musar. And it's called, Everyday Holiness, which, so the person that directed me to the book is the first person who was teaching Musar in this country, which is Rabbi Marcia Plum. And my journey actually even started before then, because I was at a point in my life where, as I said earlier, I felt like I couldn't change anything. I couldn't change the world. I couldn't change my family. I couldn't change and progressively got back to myself. And I thought, what am I supposed to do? I was really throwing my hands up in the air. And I also felt like I was saying prayers every week and doing all the right things, I thought, and not feeling like everything was connecting up together. And so I was searching for something. And my mother was taking a Musar class, of all things, in California. When I was visiting her, she said, "Oh, you want to come along?" I said, "What is this Musar thing?" And she said, "Well, it's a good teacher." I'm like, okay. And it's kind of nice to go to class with my mom. So we went, and I was completely mesmerized. They actually were tackling a very, very difficult text, but they barely got past the first page, this group, in terms of their conversations, not just about what the text itself said, but how they could apply it to their everyday lives, which is, she mentions it in the film that Musar is about practice. Like, you don't study Musar, you do Musar. And so when I came back to the UK after going to this class and being all excited, I asked Rabbi Marcia Plum what book she might could start with that would be a little more accessible, because I felt the other book was really difficult. And she said, "Oh, Everyday Holiness." So that's where I started. And I got so excited. And meanwhile, she had been teaching it locally in her community and also in Lamud every year. But I started getting really excited and ended up around the same time found out that the Musar Institute was training rabbis to be facilitators. And it was their first ever cohort that they were doing that with. So I signed up immediately. And while I was doing that, to the best of my ability, I was also teaching with my own communities. And and the rest, I guess, is history, as they say.
That's just absolutely fantastic. So I love the connections that we have very often, that we may be influenced by rabbis, but my dad may be a rabbi, but I'm as influenced by my mum, who's not. And we should always be aware of the influence that may be able to our parents and those who provide parental influence on our lives may be able to provide. I'm delighted about that. But you've sort of provided, you alluded to the fact that you began to introduce it into your community. And how did that work?
So I made a decision, particularly with my Jewish journey students. So people who are on the journey to become Jewish and go through the Beit Din. But also there would be other people that would take the class sometimes too. And I made a decision that that would be the spiritual component of the course. So they'd be coming to services, they'd be studying, they'd be writing in their journals. And I felt that this was a really important, tangible aspect of Judaism that I think we don't always get all the time in the liberal movement, because we have a very different relationship to mitzvot that you might with Orthodoxy or Masorti. And there is this funny relationship with mitzvah as commandment. I hear from my own community, people don't want to be commanded to do anything. But what I loved about this is it incorporated the values of Judaism. So the heart aspect of it, the text. So you had to really think about what you were reading and kind of look at it and personal reactions. And then the third part would be that how you act on that. So I brought it to a community I had about 12 years ago. And it was a bit of an experiment at the time, to be honest. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But can I share a story?
We all love stories.
Okay.
So please go ahead.
So I had a fellow in my class who he described himself as impatient and fairly grumpy and could lose his temper quite easily. And we had been working on anava, which is humility, but it really is about balanced self. And there was a reference in the film about not taking up more than your appropriate space, no more than your place, no less than your space. So we'd been working on this for a few weeks, and we came in, sat down, and I said, well, does anybody have any experiences, stories to share around anava? And he said, yeah, I have. And he hadn't actually shared to that point. So everybody immediately sat up and started listening to him. And he said, so there's a newsstand that I go to that I pick up the JC every week. And I have it on, he has a subscription and he just goes and pays it up. And the fellow who owns the shop is Muslim, he's Jewish, and they've had a long-standing relationship. And one day he went in there, it was a few weeks before, and there was a woman working there, and he said, oh, I want to pick up my copy of the JC. And she said, what's that? And he said, oh, the Jewish Chronicle. And she said, well, why would you want to buy something like that? And was extremely rude to him. And his response was, well, probably because I'm Jewish. And she said some really pointed things about that reflected her perspective on Jewish people. And he said to her, he said, you know what you're saying is not who I am and not my experience. And that's not the way my family grew up. And the whole time this was going on, the owner of the shop, who he'd known for 10 years, was sort of standing in the corner watching. And the woman who had helped him went in the back, and he said, just kind of looked at him, didn't say anything. Got his copy of the JC. A few days later, the owner calls him and said, I just want to let you know I fired her. And he said, what do you mean you fired her? And he said, she doesn't speak to my customers that way. And he said, but she was just ignorant. She didn't know any better. And the group of us, as he's telling this story, we were all like that. And he said, you know what? I know that if I had encountered that situation before, I would have started screaming at her. And in that moment, he realized he had a choice. And this is something that through the practice of Musar, we experience that at each moment, each encounter, we have an opportunity and a choice in how we respond to a situation. And he suddenly realized he had a choice. He could either be that grumpy, angry person, or he could look at her differently. And I love telling that story because it's just such a perfect encapsulation of how you practice Musar and what it can do for you, and the knock-on effect on other people.
So I mean, an incredible story, and I'm sure you've probably got a library full now as well, having given an impression to so many people quite locally. Now, one of the things I've loved about our Kala, our rabbinic Kala, it's a time when we go away as rabbis for 2.5 days, and we get to meet together, to study together, to pray together, learn, and help us hopefully to drive liberal Judaism forward into the next 120 years. And one of the most unique characteristics of the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years or so has been your influence on the services and the prayer services that you've introduced to us, which have been very unique. Now, we got to experience that, but no one else really did, apart from your small communities that you're working with wherever you were. But the pandemic brought a different opportunity to bring Musar to a wider public.
Thank you. Yeah, it was quite amazing because, as I've told you, that when we went into lockdown, I thought I have to do something. And I didn't even plan it exactly. I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go on Facebook Live and do a service. And instinctually, it would be a Musar service because that flows through everything I do. Of course, using the structure of the service in the Liberal Prayer Book and in Lev Chadash. And so it started with one day, and then a couple people said, why didn't you tell us you were on? And of course I had to laugh because I said, well, I didn't know till about an hour before I was going to do it at all. They said, so are you going to be back? And I said, yeah, okay. So I went on the next day and the next day. And then, a week turned into a month, and it just kept going and started to attract quite a few people that really, really connected with the message and the practice. And I would vary it. Sometimes I'd do a meditation. There would usually be some sort of chant. And it just grew from there. It really kind of surprised me. I thought it would be this quiet little thing that I'd do for a while. And I'd occasionally get a message saying, are you still doing this? Yes, yes. So in a way, it more than a lot of other avenues opened Musar up to a wider audience in the UK.
And you mentioned the nigun, the meditation, and it is such an important part of this. And I know we've been really interactive compared to many other sessions that we've had on the LJ Education Hub already, with a piece of video and etc. But I wonder whether you might provide us with just an example of a nigun, which perhaps you might want to close your eyes and just let yourself float away with, or just to switch off for a moment to hear.
Let me think. Into pockets the world was created just for me. Into pockets the world was created just for me. In one I am dust and ashes, in the other I am dust and ashes. Yai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai, dai 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 dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai, dai 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 dai. Yai dai dai, dai dai dai. Yai dai, dai dai dai. I have 2 pockets, and in one the world was created just for me, and in the other I am dust and ashes.
I'm going to be sorry to speak now, because I'd be very happy to leave it at that, and we can all go to bed and just enjoy ourselves and close our eyes and possibly, hopefully, feel good about ourselves and the world around us and our input into it. But thank you for giving us an example, because I think it's really important that people experience just a little bit, because Rabbi Monique has already said it's about practice, it's about doing, not just about studying. And a very important part of it. So we just wanted to bring just a little bit of example as well to you this evening. This is off script, Rabbi Monique, but it's from what we've talked about, and also what Rabbis Charlie and Judith talked about last week. I think it's important that we do address it. You've mentioned commandments, and some people feeling uncomfortable about being commanded. All of this, the whole video alluded to, but never mentioned the commander, God. So the word God didn't come. I was just fascinated. The second time I've listened through the video, and I don't think I heard the word God. And of course, this last week's session was all about God, and now we've got a complete flip. Where does God fit into Musar?
That's such a great question, and I think so. At a very basic level, there is Yediat Ha'el, just an acknowledgement that there is something out there, which is very different than believing in a God. It's just that so, if we are practicing Musar, there may be a God out there, there may not be a God, depending on who you are, but actually it's just acknowledging that, okay, there is the God of Israel, that is the Jewish God that we talk about. And whatever my relationship is with that God, the more important thing is how I treat other human beings. That really, and in essence, when we do that, when we are aspiring to become a mensch, when we treat people with kindness and dignity and respect, we are acting in the image of God that our scripture tells us that we were created in.
So it doesn't matter so much what our theology is or where we come from in the path, whether we come from a rejection of a complete faith in, whatever that means, to the individual. This is a practice that everybody could participate in.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that's just important to draw out, and just because the word God hadn't appeared at that moment in time, so I thought it was, God is in the room somewhere. So I just thought we ought to tease that.
So it's very funny. It wasn't in the video, but on one of the, there was an all-day program that Tiffany Schlein did, a day of character. They do them every year. And in one of the conversations she had with Alan Marinas, there was a conversation around God. And she said, well, I don't believe in God, or something. She made some statement like that, or I'm not sure I believe in God. And Alan Marinas said, does it really matter? Because this is about, just act as if, almost. And maybe there, whether there is or isn't, doesn't really matter. It's more important our actions and how we speak to each other.
Okay, thank you. I've got Rabbi Judith Rosenberry in my screen as well, and I'm just wondering what's going. I hope she's going to ask a few questions earlier on, and others might as well. It's really fascinating because for some people, Judaism is all about that notion around theology, and things spin out of it. The beauty of Judaism is there are many different paths, and listening to you this evening provides a path which maybe others haven't considered before. The phrase ethical monotheism was raised last week, and this isn't just all a response to it, but so we've dealt a little bit with theism and accepting that this is the Jewish God and therefore there's one. To talk a little bit about Musar and Tikkun Olam, social justice action. How does this work in a wider sense rather than just the individual?
So can I share my screen?
Oh, please.
Yeah, let me just...
You can tell we're back on program now. Monique's been very, very good in answering questions which we hadn't scripted.
Okay, so it actually all goes back to our sacred texts. And this should be familiar to quite a few people. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elohim bara oto zachar nekeva bara otam. God created the human in God's psalmo. And again, it's interesting. This is the text I chose given what you were just asking. In the tselem of God did God create the human. Male and female did God create them. So this is very much about whether or not you believe that there was some being before. We can ask the questions of ourselves, what does it mean to be and act in the image of God? And not a God that is random and just sort of does things that are highly unpredictable, but a God that cares about human beings so that we care about each other. So this whole idea of tikkun olam and repairing the world, the starting point is how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And we're all made b'tselem Elohim, in God's image. And then I want to take us to the second one, which you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen, and you shall be loving toward your neighbor who is like you. I am the eternal. This bolded bit, the translation, is actually how Rabbi Louis Jacobs, Zichrono Livracha, translates this. And I think it's much more effective and definitely addresses the idea of tikkun olam, because usually when we think of the word love, we know the translation, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And it's very hard for me, I don't know about the viewers here, to get past love translated that way as being a feeling, which it's very hard. Then what do you do with it? You love your neighbor, what does that look like? But here in this translation, and also I think it works better with the structure of the Hebrew, if you know the Hebrew, you shall be loving towards your neighbor. That it's all about action. It's all about how you treat each other. And you treat them because who is like you, going back to that first text that I showed, right? That we are all made in God's image. And so if we keep that in mind with everything that we do, and going back to that quote I showed you earlier from Salanter about, I couldn't change the world and I couldn't change my family. It starts from you and how you interact with another human being. And I think the beauty of this is that we have lots of opportunities to do that, right? Whether we're on the telephone with someone, whether we're standing in line at the checkout counter, maybe someone's taking their time paying the bus driver, whatever it is. There are so many different chances that we have to practice being loving towards our neighbor. And I truly do believe there's a ripple effect when you start doing that. And I see that even I'm starting to see that, I think, with groups of people I've worked with, that I start to hear the language, but also that they're interacting with others in different ways, and they see the benefit of it. So, and I think the difference here between, here, let me stop this so you can just see me. The The difference between self-help and Musar is self-help is like, how do I make my life better so I can have a better life? It's me, 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 me. Musar is, how can I be active in the world so I can make the world a better place? You know, one person at a time or two people, however many people at a time. By extension, our life's going to get better anyway because we're making everything better around us. And I can't think of a better way to underpin Tikkun Olam than with how we act individually. You know, Aaron, there's so many people who've done amazing things in the world that I'm sure it's been the same for you, that I read about them and I find out that their personal life has been horrible. And even though they did great things, the people who knew them well didn't want to say anything because it wasn't so nice. And I don't believe you have to have sort of a split personality that way. I think that everything that we do can infuse, we can infuse character into everything that how we act in the world.
It's fascinating that you say this. And Tammy, my wife, is just sat here listening to this. And one of the chants that the meditations that you introduced to us actually was in the draft New Liturgy as well. Behold, I accept upon myself the commandment to love my neighbour as myself, and I find that very arresting, the chant itself, and I find those words playing over in my mind a lot. And in that conversation, I can be very patient generally with my congregants, but sometimes when I come home, I'm not quite as patient. And I found, I hope it's worked, I've found often when I might have snapped at some point in time, every now and then I just play that meditation over in my head. You know, I feel like I want to respond and just say, as is famous within our household as the word idiot, but just just taking that moment just to be able to take that time. And that's one of those Musar practices that I think you very much influenced me in my own personal life for. And you've done that as well, also, I think, by inserting things into maybe sometimes a paragraph or something into some of the practices that you regularly use within your own personal life, but also community. Birkat Hamazon being one, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure which bit you're referring to.
Opening up mind, heart, and hands, I think.
Yeah, I definitely use that more than just in Birkat Hamazon. Thank you, Aaron. I forgot about that. Yeah, so there's the quote towards the end of Birkat Hamazon that gets inserted in the liturgy. There in the Orthodox liturgy, there's a paragraph that talks about, I've never seen a righteous man go hungry. And you can have various interpretations of that, but it's been replaced with this, you know, I can't remember the exact quote without looking it up, but it's, you know, help us not to ignore the needs of others and heed their cry for food, open our eyes and our hearts and our hands to share our gifts and help remove hunger and want from our world.
Yeah, and I think LJ Wynetzer have very much taken that on as a very important part of their practice.
But what I think it's really interesting, and why I really embrace that quote, is the very last part, or the last part of it, open our eyes and our hearts and our hands. Because what Musar does for me is it unifies all that in practice. You know, I see something going on, I'm moved by it, and then I do something. Okay, not for everything, because I think we can't act on everything. We'll all lose our minds trying to fix everything in the world. But, you know, where we see we can do something, I think it's really important.
Thank you so much. Now, we want to make sure that we'll leave time for people to ask questions and to challenge as well, because please do challenge away. I'm going to challenge, just as we lead into that, you might want to even put some questions into the chat. Maybe we'll hand over to Rabbi Charlie to handle the questions, because you'll be able to see more. One of the things that's literally just come to me, so again, apologies for going off script in any shape or form. Now, there was a time, and I can't remember whether it was 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, where people talked about boo Jews, people who were Jewish, but practiced Buddhism. Is this the era of the Muju? As in, is it something which I'm just putting it alongside in a way, and just trying to help and shape and form, and especially in our conversations about what liberal Judaism will be into the next 120 years. Is it a practice which, liberal Jews, it's one of the tools that we might use within our practice. We can still define ourselves as a liberal Jew and practice Musar, or is Musar liberal Judaism, or how do you see this developing?
I see it as a tool, but also a way of, and such a great question, actually, a tool of pulling together uniting all the different aspects of Judaism. Because I was feeling very disconnected, and this is, for me, has worked. It's interesting that you mentioned the Bujus, but also the time period, because, like the 70s roughly were like the me generation, and then there've been all these subsequent generations. But I think, when you're talking about people searching for Eastern philosophy or whatever it is, people have been searching for something. Like, I think there's been a hunger for a way of connecting spiritually with Judaism that hasn't always been there. Like, for me, okay, this is not for everybody else, but for me, staying with my rational mind, and that approach has never worked for me. I'm very much from the heart. And so I need to see that all the pieces join up for it to be able to be memorable and significant and moving for me, and something that I keep. And I think, I don't know, I mean, this is now probably 30 years that Musar has been growing again, as they mentioned in the film. It almost got wiped out during the Shoah because all the Musar teachers were killed. But I think this is very much, as was said about this growing thinking around developing character and becoming better people. And I think it can be a brilliant tool for liberal Jews to do that and take action and improve what their world is.
Thank you for answering so honestly. Again, my apologies for going off script, because we hadn't talked about that. That was very unscripted, but it just came to me as I was listening to you, and something that was worth us pondering on. Well, I'm going to hand that over to Rabbi Charlie to maybe she's got some questions, but also maybe others have asked questions as well that I just haven't seen. And maybe we'll just have 2 minutes at the end, Monique, so that we can just come back and say that if people are interested, how might they further their interest in Musar? Charlie.
Thank you both, Aaron, for asking some really amazing questions, which allowed Monique to really give us not just the kind of cerebral feel of what Musar might be like, but actually a really tactile feel of what it means to participate. We haven't yet got any questions, but I'm sure now that I've pointed that out, I'm going to look around the room and there are going to be questions. Yes, I'm seeing a nodding. Darcy, is that nodding because you are?
Yes, I have so many questions.
Great.
I'll just ask one. Thank you so much. That was illuminating. I have to say, I have always bristled a little bit around Musar because I'm very wounded by self-help culture, self-development culture, neoliberal productivity culture, all of these like systems that are constantly surrounding us, telling us to be better and to monitor ourselves and to, work in 5-minute increments and, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I love about religion and about Judaism is kind of a refusal to reduce things to that level. And I know you said it's more about other help than self-help and world help than self-help. But I just wonder if you have any thoughts about, on a practical, embodied, experiential level, like how would Musar feel different to, yet another self-help craze that I might subject myself to?
So it's a really great question. And I think, first of all, what I want to say is, in terms of modern Musar, I can't speak for more of the ancient version, which was probably a bit more brutal in a lot of ways. There were very extreme practices that were done 50, 80, 100 years ago. But in terms of modern Musar, it is meant to be life affirming. So if something's going on with your practice that is making you feel like a really bad person, and like, you know, that is underscoring your and opening your wounds, then, you know, if you're working in a group or you're working with a Musar teacher, that it's something that is really important to discuss with that teacher. I have heard people say that, you know, Musar is not for people that have lots of wounds, but I have quite a few myself, and to be honest, and I think I'm really careful about the messages. I think that's part of it too, is what messages you pick up for it. And it's not about beating yourself up and, you know, to be a better person. Actually, all that potential's inside you, and it's just tapping into it. I have another teacher who's Rabbi Mark Margolius at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, and he tends to blend Hasidism with Musar. Like, so they don't call it their practice, they call it awareness and action. But actually, the way they do awareness and action is how I do Musar. And it's very gentle. Not all the teachers will be gentle. I think it needs to be gentle. We're very wounded. Like, we don't need one more thing to beat us up, or that one more tool that we have to beat ourselves up. So I think it's about making sure that you're taking proper care, paying attention to what's coming up for you, talking to your teacher if it becomes an issue. I would never, you know, the last thing I would want to do or would want to take on is something that would damage other people.
Thank you, Darcy, for an incredible question.
Really good question.
Really, leaving, I think, also, despite a wonderful answer from Monique, I think with more to think about. There's a question from Alex. Hi, Alex, asking about maybe a lot of us are unknowingly following Musar. I would love to know more on how to learn to practice it. So I'm going to turn that into like a specific question, which is, what would you say to people in this room about they want to take their journey with Musar, learning a little bit more? What should be their next first step after, well, maybe not taking Darcy's question, not maybe this evening, but like over the bank holiday when they maybe have some time on their hands, where would their next step be to go?
So I mean, also because I facilitate for the Musar Institute, I tend to bring them up a lot, but I think they're also, I would start, honestly, where I started, which is with, everyday holiness. And I'm not getting paid for that, just so you know that it's not a paid promotion. But the reason I recommend it, and there's one other book that he's written that's also quite helpful, but this one, what it does is it gives you the history and the sort of the thinking behind it. And then it has a whole section. The middle section is on different character traits and how you look at them and evaluate them and how you might do something with them. And then the last part is really how you put it into practice. So if you tend to absorb that way, go for the book, right? Start with that. The Musar Institute does run classes on an ongoing basis. Institute for Jewish Spirituality, as I mentioned, does have their awareness and action program is actually Musar, like I said, the way I do it, and that's another way. I'm hoping to teach more classes maybe in the autumn, and please do get in touch if you'd like to sign up, because I would do it probably on virtually.
So Monique, that's the question that we always ask at the end of when we have a guest on. We always say, where can they find you? So if somebody wants to find out when you're teaching a course next, or they want to maybe watch some of your videos, where can they previous sessions you've done? Is there we go, thank you. You can email Monique, but perhaps also after this we'll send out maybe a few links to some of the things that you've done as well, and then people can get some more of you, which I know we've definitely So Aaron, I'm going to hand back to you because I know you wanted a couple of minutes as we draw to a close, just to bring us.
You've sort of done it, but also just to answer a question that you can get to hear Monique very, very shortly on Saturday night, in fact. If you want to join us online, a number of communities are gathered together for a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and Monique is one of the speakers answering the question of what revelation means to her, and I'm sure she will bring in her particular approach to Judaism, as will Rabbi Judith Rosenberry, who's here, and Rabbi Eli Tikva-Sarah, and Rabbi Neil James as well. So another opportunity this Saturday night. If you want to do that, then I will post in the piece as well. And I'm sure that if Monique is going to be teaching soon, then I'm sure that we'll send that out as part of Liberal Judaism also, so that everybody who wants to can connect with. Well, my friend, my colleague, both of us have been a little bit unwell over the last period of time, and it's been good to be in contact with her. I can vouch for the gentle soul that she is, and I think you just demonstrated that in your response to Darcy, and hopefully you'll get another opportunity either this Saturday or another time in the future. I've not done my homework. This shows how unwell I've been, because I normally do my homework, in working out what we got next week, Rabbi Charlie. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Aaron. Perfect. So next week, Wednesday, the 8th of June, we've got Rabbi Michael Shire, who has just, I think, entered the room in order, I know, to check that we were pushing his session for next week. So thank you, Michael. Lovely to see you. So we've got Rabbi Dr. Michael Shire, Encountering Liberal Judaism and a New Hasidism. And again, in that amazing way that these things happen, Monique, Rabbi Monique has set that up for you beautifully next week, Michael. So we look forward to that. And I also would not be doing my job properly if I didn't remind you as well to look out for our rally event next Thursday, getting ready for our fundraising event. If you want to find out a little bit more about it, you're not sure if you want to be an ambassador, if you can be an ambassador, come in, or you just want to have a good fun evening with a bunch of liberal Jews, then come and join us next Thursday as well. I, in the meantime, wish you all a really good night and thank both of our speakers, both Rabbi Aaron Goldstein and Rabbi Monique Mayer, for just another wonderful session in this great education hub on Liberal Judaism, 120 years. Good night, everybody.